Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. I am Kara. Along with being the host of this very podcast, I am also the coach behind a community we call Pathway to Peace Coaching Community. And before we get into this very episode that you've clicked on to listen, I want to take a minute to let you know that the doors to the community will be open February 23rd, 2026. And so now is the time to think about joining us. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is the Pathway to Peace Coaching Community? And very briefly, it is a community of moms just like you who have felt alone and don't want to sit and experience of feeling stuck and alone while they live out this special needs mom life experience. There's a lot to the community, and I am sharing this now because it's time to act and to get all those questions answered. We only open the door a few times a year, and what I invite you to do is to sign up for the wait list, which will get you access to all of the details that I can't mention here, and to answer some of the questions you might have. To find the wait list, go ahead and Google Special Needs Mom Podcast, Pathway to Peace, or simply click on the show notes to this episode and look for the link. We hope to see you there, and now let's get on to the episode. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Alrighty, I come to you on an afternoon right before Levi is going to get dropped off by the bus, and the rest of my children are going to rain down on my home and totally shift gears. And I got kind of a headache today. And so I had a real high morning, which I'll tell you about in a second. And then it went pretty low with my headache and just kind of hit the wall. And now I'm swooping back up. And so I thought, you know what, let me get this introduction done before I move on, because that'll feel really good to have that all settled. Because I had a conversation this morning with my friend, Anika Atkins, and I'm just so excited to bring it to you. I've known her for about 5 years, and naturally as relationships do, it's evolved. And as I've gotten to know her more and more, she's just more and more interesting. That sounds like a case study. More and more fun to get to know and to learn about her experiences, both as a special needs mom, as a medical mom, as a woman, and as a professional. And so this conversation, what you will not hear is her personal story as it relates to being a caregiver. That will come in a future episode. But what we did focus on is her experience as an ethics educator. And so I'm going to read a little bit more formal bio, and then I'll also talk a little bit more in a second about what's to come in this episode. So here we go. Anika Atkins, an ethics educator in her past life who cares about the moments healthcare prefers to file under, in quotes, let's not talk about that. She served as the executive director for the American Society of Dental Ethics from 2007 to 2013, and taught Christian dental and medical ethics as an associate professor, including ethics sessions for allied health and medical students. And we talk about that in the episode. It's really fascinating, the kinds of situations that she curated as part of her work. Her route to ethics began at age 20 during dental hygiene school on a Marine base clinic rotation, when a series of experiences reshaped how she understood professionalism, power, and sexual harassment. She took that moment as a God-given assignment and ran with it, eventually earning her master's in Christian biomedical and clinical ethics. Then, her daughter's medical journey moved ethics from the classroom into real life, lived daily inside the healthcare system, and has deepened her commitment to better communicate, have honest reflection, and work to practice and protect trust when it mattered most. And her daughter, let's talk a little bit about who she is in the caregiving world. Ella was diagnosed at age 3 months, and she's now 12 years old. She has infantile onset Pompe, and her particular medical profile makes her uncommon even among Pompe families. So she's kind of rare within a rare community, and I know a lot of you will relate to that. Over the years, she's held a lot at once: deep gratitude and real fear, steady seasons and sudden changes. She's watched her daughter Ella thrive in hard-won ways and also lived with how quickly things can shift. As Ella's mom, she's learned how much of this life is ongoing advocacy, constant recalibration, and trying to stay grounded while all the medical landscapes keep evolving. And so that is a brief introduction to who our guest is today. And what I'm thinking about as I'm reflecting on the conversation that I had this morning with Anika is this constant revisiting of being the leaders, the moms, the advocates that are in these spaces that are so hard. And actually, Anika says it at the end. And I think just what's coming to mind is grace upon grace, as in we are in some really hard situations. And yes, I think it's so valuable to reflect on those and to create spaces where we feel like we can kind of stretch ourselves and grow ourselves and do hard things. And then also in all of it, have all the compassion for ourselves in the world, because never did we ever think that we'd be in these situations, especially as it relates to the topic of medical ethics and medical mistakes and what does it look like to have ethical repair. These are kinds of things that we're talking about in this episode. And I think that's a great place to start. So let's welcome Anika Atkins. Welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast.
Oh my gosh, I am so honored and so excited.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to jump in. I've briefly introduced you in the intro of this episode. And so let's do a snapshot of kind of your own words introduction, maybe even a little bit of context of how we know each other. But then we're going to jump in to your professional background, especially because as it intersects with your role as caregiving mom, I think it's really going to be an interesting conversation, but an applicable conversation for this community to say, oh, I didn't think about that, or point us toward maybe some conversations we need to have with our medical team and or school teams. And I say school teams because I think that it's kind of all applicable, right? Like when you look at one area, you can kind of apply it to others. So before we get there, hi, and will you just do a brief introduction?
Yes, who is this person? Hi, I am Anika Atkins. Kara knows me because I was one of the originals in her coaching community for special needs moms. And I won't delve too much into that right here, but it was a life changer for me at that point. But my personal background before we delved into medical needs and a medically fragile child was I taught in medical and dental ethics. I got into that kind of in the serendipitous way. I was actually a dental hygienist for several years, and I believe God led on my heart to change and to sort of grow personally. And I just was fascinated in the field of ethics. Like, it just spoke to me that professionalism, and I originally thought I'd go into law, and
I see that. Side note, we just have to do a side note. You're an incredible writer. And there's a couple you've done, I don't know if we call them article or blog posts, I don't know what we call them these days, but we'll have those linked because they're really good. And I feel like just so relatable, but I think really good reading for me is using your words to help understand my experience better because I relate to you. So that's a side note. Okay, back to your story. You were thinking about law.
Yeah. And I will say with that, in this community, I think we all have such great stories to tell. Deep, interesting ones. And I wanted to show what it's like to be sitting in a hospital room with your child. That's why I write. And that's kind of why I looked into ethics too, is because I wanted something of depth. I didn't want to just, law was great. And I loved to study the specifics of cases and things, but ethics goes a little bit more into a language that I think is applicable and holds depth and can even be seen kind of spiritually. Like, a lot of ethics was founded on a Christian basis. Mm-hmm. So, some of the terminology we use in ethics, and there's really 4 founding principles. So things like non-maleficence, I can't even say the word, but I do too.
Like I can picture it.
Yeah. Which sounds like a Disney character, but it actually is to do no harm. And the second would be beneficence, to benefit your patient or whoever you're caregiving. The third would be justice and fairness and truth-telling. And those are the 4 that I'll kind of concentrate on. Those are kind of the founders of ethics. And so, originally when I got into this field, it started when I was young. I was 20, pursuing this career in hygiene. And I had an issue that was super inappropriate. Now I look back and it was truly, harassment and it was sexual in nature. And I did not know how to handle it. I took the blame. Was fully, I had done something. This is why it happened. When I went to seek help from the professional entity that I was studying with, it was like, it was my fault. I had done something.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's a whole story behind all of that. But having gone through that, I realized that, hey, I want to look at this, like how within, this community at that time, it was dental, how does ethics play out? What does professionalism look like? How do we do this? So as I got into that field, ethics wasn't a huge study like it would be in medicine, which makes sense. You have more life and death that you're dealing. Mm-hmm. But in dentistry, it's like not quite so life and death. And that if it is life and death, we've just hit a huge jump in our ethical issue.
Yeah.
But it was a field that was needed because it's very independent. Providers are providing care without the guides of like a institution kind of guiding as much. They are, but it's different. So with that, I started studying and worked in ethics for a period of time, more in dental hygiene. Then I worked more towards dentistry, and I worked my way into the American College. Actually, it was the American Society for Dental Ethics. And we worked with dental education across the United States. So it was great. It was working with students. And I guess that's where my heart was at the time, because I felt like if we're going to make a difference, growth, it needs to start with the students. It needs to start when they're trained. Are we using the ethics language, right or wrong? And usually in ethics, it's not necessarily right or wrong. It'd be easy to make a decision if it were, but usually it's gray.
Yeah.
But, that's really where I think the professions that we're dealing with, like, all the different fields. It could be OT, PT, speech. It could be the physicians we're dealing with, the nurses we're dealing with, whatever. They all have a professional code. They all have ethics that they've been educated with. But I think it's an area of growth in these fields as well that we still there needs to be further growth. And when I say that, I was just reading a study that was saying 90% of students in dental, that's the word I'm working with, dental school have cheated in some format, and they've admitted this, which is a big, I guess, I think in our society today with the use of technology, it is going to be more and more common of what that is, what that looks like. So anyway, did I get on?
Well, and actually on that point, I think it's so my oldest son is in the process of applying. Well, he's already applied to all the colleges and then written the essays. We're now in the scholarship round. And the line between the ethical use of AI as like applying for a scholarship and or college applications, I can see how slippery the slope is in terms of, and how tempting it is. Like when this tool is right here that can edit your essay, perhaps better than you have the capability to, it's pretty hard not to just plop that baby in there. And so I could see how, the questions of what is okay and what's not okay, they're important to discuss and to create structures around, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting time. I mean, we're going to see some explosions in that realm. And I don't know how to police that, what that's going to end up looking like. Because I think technology does take us to this whole other realm where we're not thinking ourselves in a way. We're relying so heavily on technology that, and in good ways, it's not all bad, obviously. But an example, I used to work with students in a simulation lab. So we had a dummy that was full-size human, and we could edit all of the different elements. So we could do a basic medical emergency with this.
That was really cool.
It was super cool. And then you bring students in. So we bring medical students, nursing, pharmacy, different specialists. And one of the ones, and then we'd have actors that would play the parts of everybody bedside and communicate through the patient. It was interesting because students so often, missed what the ethical issue was in the room or would dismiss it, deny, and then others really clued in. It was an interesting setting. And what we tried to emulate and maybe bring light to was the use of everyone in the room as a voice to help facilitate care. What's really going on in the room. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
And it is kind of, I don't know why it stays in my mind. I think it's partly because it's funny, but it was one that it kind of applies, but it had to do with, this dummy that we had in the bed. We threw a medical emergency at this team. And, again, they're students, so they're focused on what's going on there. And what they didn't clue in on was the patient had been disrobed. And it's a fully anatomically correct. And so then, the daughter's bedside, the patient, the actor's saying, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable here. I'm feeling, like they're giving clues. Nobody was picking up on it. And again, it's a different setting. It's not like a medical emergency, like life or death particularly. But when we went into the room after to talk with the students, they clued in immediately when the video's there. But I mean, nobody was getting it. And I just think, that's the reality sometimes is that they get clued in on the focus of the medical, the emergency, or something to that effect, and they can miss other things.
The human experience part of it, that this person is not a project, that they are having their experience. And we'll give them grace, of course, because they're a student and that it's a situation. Dummy, right? Yeah. But still, I bet that actually, I can imagine that was so impactful. Hopefully it was so impactful for those students.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we were really trying to work on, and this was in the, 2014 was when I finished really full-time working in that world, but we were trying to help reconcile. So one of the things we wanted to work on is looking at mistakes that we make and how do we teach these students to come back and reconcile with the patients and their caregivers, even more importantly, because that is where, even from a biblical standpoint, the healing is done, is the reconcile. You can recognize an issue's been done, but if you don't do the reconciliation part of it, you haven't, fulfilled that circle. You haven't created the healing that needs to be done.
That is, okay, so let's now kind of talk about this medical mistakes. And so I want to create a baseline for what do we even mean by medical mistake? Because what I might consider a mistake, the doctor might not, right? Or the other provider, whoever we're working with. But so, and also I know that there's levels of mistakes. So maybe give an example of a low grade mistake, mid grade, high grade kind of thing. Let's kind of get a baseline for understanding of what kind of things happen that we are talking about.
Okay. And I think those that are listening could imagine this because there is different. Not every type of mistake is the same. Obviously, there's different levels to it. So I would say, for an example of just a very minor, low-level mistake would be, what's coming to mind is I've called my provider. I've asked for him to send in a referral, possibly, or something like that. it doesn't get done, I have to call again. And it's a minor frustration, but it really doesn't have a huge impact to me or to my daughter. You can argue one way or another, but it really isn't something that's going to really affect on a deeper level. So resolution there would be different than, say, mid-level. And if I was an example that comes with the mid-level, and again, you can tease these apart. So you could go from 1 to 7, and I'm going to do, 1, 2, and 3. So the mid-level would be coming up as talking with a girlfriend who is in the healthcare world. Her son is a medically fragile child. He just went in for a procedure, respiratory therapy, mismanaged the case. So he was put into sort of a riskier situation than needed to be, partly because the person that they had working with him was rather new to the whole field and wasn't probably the person that should have been in that position, or should have been, guided by someone of more experience. So it put her son at much higher risk. And she could recognize that because she has all the experience in the health world. And so she dealt with that situation differently than we might handle the first situation. And we can then, look at the most extreme would be medical error or mistake that ends in death. And I texted you this earlier because I was reading an article that the third leading cause of death in hospitals is medical error, which is reported medical error. I'd be so curious to know, what that even looks like otherwise, And so with that level, that takes you to a much different, that is probably one that would require the use, there'd probably be legal involved. Reconciliation for self would be possibly bringing in an ethics consult from the teams there at the hospital. I always think that's important to keep in mind, that you can always call on that. And they're going to typically bring to the table a rounded voice that's more neutral than you would, and they're going to look at everyone's voices.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. You're telling me that when you're in, let's say you're an inpatient, something happens, you can say, I would like to have what is this person called?
Their ethics team. So
your ethics team. Okay. This is like incredible that as much time as we have lived in the hospital, I didn't know this existed. I didn't know existed.
I don't think many people do. And you can call them at any point. But I think in general, they're called in when something's really like a very complex situation. So maybe you have two parents that aren't on the same page for what care is going to be done for their child. And you need this group of voices. Or it could be something really complex because I was able to sit in on some of the teams at the university I taught with and watch the group. So it wouldn't be legal. It would be many times an attorney, physicians, nurses. Well-trained and even ethicists will come in. They usually will give you a really good perspective. They aren't there to side. They're there to really sort of tease apart what's going on and help you see in a better way. Maybe clarity. I think that's really what they do. They bring language and clarity to a situation that's very complex and overwhelming. I've used it, and the way I've used it has been, so the way I did it was I Googled the ethics and policy for one of the big pharmaceutical companies when I was having an issue with getting some medication. This is when I was having a moment too, people. Like I had a moment where I was so mad and I was like, this is an ethics issue. I'm going to figure out who can.
We've all done that Googling. I was Googling the board of my son's hospital there for a couple minutes.
Did you send emails? That's the... Yeah.
I didn't get that far.
I'm not justifying doing this, but I did. And I contacted them and gave them sort of what my thoughts were in regards to what was going on. And they responded, the person and the director, and he actually was then able to go back and review phone calls that we had had.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if it went anywhere. I felt better, but my hope is that it was used for education. That's really it. We have to learn from each other. We have to that's, we talk about this horrible statistic of medical error, which is terrifying as a parent like we are to think of. We're in the hospital all the time, and when is it when are we the next person that's going to
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
So how can we help? What can we do from parents' perspective that might circumvent, bring some perspective to a situation? We're not here to be threatening. We're here to really just do better. We all are. We want to proceed in a way that's going to benefit not only ourselves, but all of the families that are in the situation like we are.
I mean, I love that thought that we have to learn from each other, and both, provider to patient to caregiver, but also, right here, right now with two caregiving moms, like learning from one another. And then, of course, you supporting this community to become more, one, first aware of this industry, or this aspect of medical care. But let's keep looking at this medical mistake thing. So I have a question. It's kind of specific, and it is from my own story. In terms of, is this a mistake or how do we classify this? So I'm going to generalize it to not get sued, but also my experience. And so I want to look at this particular, what I think might have been, I don't know if I call a mistake as much of an oversight, but I want to use this as an example to then answer some of the questions that one might have. Like, when something happens, what does ethical repair look like? And like, what do we do as caregivers to navigate this? Because I don't know. I mean, one, I'm just like anybody else. I don't super love conversations that I feel like could be confrontational. So there's that, but also even the logistics of this. How do I bring this to their attention in a way that is going to achieve the outcome that I want? So here's the scenario. Is that okay if we use a scenario to kind of talk through some of these questions? Okay. So my son Levi was having an issue with, let's see, how do I describe this to be? He was having an issue that was affecting his ability to walk. It was causing him pain. Okay. And so we were going to the doctor that we most often saw for that particular area of his care. And this doctor did not know what's going on and said so. And I did like that. I like transparency. So I don't know what's going on. And I think they maybe the experience that I had is kind of like, almost like, not my problem. Like, I don't know what it is. And they were very willing to refer us to other providers, in which case we went to, I'm trying to think of the difference. We went to one specialist to look at one part of the care, and then we were referred to another specialist. And that's the point. And I'll say we first were referred to nephrology. We got into nephrology. They ruled out any issues. Then we were referred to cardiology. And this is the point where even as I retell the story, I start to feel it in my body. Because as most of us know, referrals to specialists take a long time.
Oh.
And so it's the first referral, we waited however many months to nephrology. After that referral, we got to cardiology. And I don't remember the timeline, but I remember hearing the timeline and knowing absolutely not. We cannot wait 6 months, I don't know how much it was, to figure out what this is. My son is in pain. And so this is not just a let's keep getting bounced down the line. But here's where I think, where I think that there was a misstep is in this doctor not owning it and saying, this is my patient and I need to figure out what's going on, and doing the work to get us to the people that we needed to get to with the timeline that we needed to get to it, knowing this person was in pain. And I've shared this story on the podcast before. What I ultimately ended up doing is doing what I call, what do I call it? I call it like, it was like a peaceful protest, basically a silent stand-in, where I went to the emergency room prepared to not leave until they figured out what was causing the pain for my son. And is that the appropriate use for the emergency room? No, probably not. But for a lot of very good reasons, I was unwilling to continue to let my son be kind of a victim of the system. So, and sure enough, we were inpatient for like 4 days. And guess what? We figured out the issue. And it took quite a few scans He was in the MRI machine for like 2 hours one day. It's like, oh my gosh. Huh.
Oh,
Okay. So that's like I gave a long story, but I want to hear your perspective of, is that a medical mistake? Is that just, I wish it went different? Like, how do you look at that from the ethics perspective?
I do think a mistake was made, a personal one. I think, so when I look at that, I think the mistake was made, again, at the beginning with that vague apology. So we talk about vague versus more specific, trust-oriented apologies. That was very vague and dismissive. And I would say that would create more anxiety, and it minimizes what you're seeing, takes away the credit of your voice.
Mm-hmm.
So in my take, I would say that is a mistake and think it's creating harm. It's not benefiting the patient. Those are all things, not creating trust. So going back to ethics language, those are all things that are missteps in my perspective. Now I can speak to this like I know what I'm talking about, but when I get into a room with my daughter, it's completely different. I flub it. I don't have the language I want to have while I'm there. I'm just getting through the appointment. I'm managing her as well as myself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I would, in that scenario, I think it's valid to look at something like that and follow it up with something written.
Mm-hmm.
Putting together an email and I think it's also a benefit to request that it's put in the chart, stating what you saw, what you felt went wrong. I think in the scenario of you being present there, like if you were to get in the face of that provider and be like, hey, you're not listening to me, which sometimes you need to. There is a time when that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't think many people love that type of threatening. I mean, sometimes we do it. We have to. But with an email, I think that by following up is kind of like saying, hey, let's clarify what happened with this scenario. I saw this. We ended up in the ER. We had this scenario. This is what they saw. I just want to be sure we're proceeding forward with clarity and that we have this documented in so-and-so's chart.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would think we could help provide in that scenario clarity. It gives you resolution. You mentioned the nervous system that we all struggle with, and that is my biggest battle. That nervous system, needing to reconcile that and feel like I've done something that, here in the future, will I have to go through this again? I think that's what we face. We carry so much. And you say to yourself, oh gosh, I'm going to be minimized again. This person or that person, how can I do this so that it's less likely? So I would say by having that in a written form that hopefully is in the chart, I'm going to guess that other care providers will look in that chart and say, oh, this mom was this specific, this organized, and clarified this. So my hope is that then leads them to a little bit more detail orientation and a little bit more clear that you're not just out here throwing smoke about what you think's going on. You're really on it with all this stuff. So does that feel to you? Does that land somewhere, or what are your thoughts?
It does. And okay. So personally, I'm like, okay, it's been a couple years since this thing happened, but we still see this doctor. So it still comes up. Like I still feel it in my body. But I think it really, for me, connected the validity in my body still feeling threatened by this because of what you just said. We will have to go through this again. Like whether it's this provider or another provider, but that like this is a real threat for me as I advocate for my son. And that it feels like, so this thing feels dangerous to me. Like if I can't get him the care that he needs when he needs it, then, X, Y, and Z could happen. And so that for me just really understands like why I'm still having a response to this particular instance. And I think does help me see kind of a couple different options in terms of what I can do to support myself. And of course, have any conversations that might need to have.
And I think that is really like what we're trying to do. I mean, because I'm the same. I've had situations, I still do. I'm an emotional person. I carry things. And so little things really get me. And in the last year, as you know, with me and Pathway to Peace, because I'm part of that community, I really struggled with some scenarios that have come up in my life. And I knew part of the struggle wasn't so much the situation. It was one, how I was handling it and not dealing with it, and the central nervous system. And that I needed to formulate a better proactive plan so that I am speaking more clearly with the caregivers that are providing, from not just letting things sort of happen. Not that you have blind trust, but like, so let me give you an example. With my daughter, we had an issue where we weren't able to access support at home. And it was one of these kind of emergent situations because she gets an infusion every week, if not more than one, maybe two. And we needed to get access. And it was, peripheral was not available. So they weren't able to get that. And so we needed to go in and actually get that vascular scan where they could.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we went in, the care provider, there was two people in the room, and I could tell there was a little bit of nervousness going on. I wasn't sure what, but my first initial thought was, great, we got this handled. Now we have this technology, we're going to nail it. I felt at ease at first. And as we got into it, and the nurse was not accessing, wasn't able to access, and there was some struggle, I was feeling for her because I could see she was really nervous about the situation. But I could also see that they were practicing on Ella because she's pretty easy. She's a, compliant.
Yeah.
And will hold still, all the things. But when Ella, I knew her limit. And that's when I stepped in and said, hey, and I did better this time. I had a similar situation a few years back, and I didn't handle it that well. This time I'm like, I spoke to him a little differently. I was like, hey, let's give some space here for a second. I needed it because I was just like, when Ella's in tears, I'm just like,
yeah. I'm picturing so many other moments of my medical mom experience. Keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. So you said, let's give a little space here.
Let's give a little space here, because I was just like, I needed it. I'm delighted. I'm saying to myself, this is what I need in this moment. Ella needs this too. And then I started to ask, I said, is there someone who has more experience who can step in here? I think Ella's at her limit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to know if that practitioner is the most advanced in the room or not. Something that going on. There's days, we all have good days and bad days in treatment, and from what we can provide. And I'm thinking of this from a caregiver side of things. That day, that person was struggling. Well, she had come to find out they were educating her on how to use that machine. It was the second time she'd ever used it. I was able to have a clear conversation with the woman that was educating. And I said, before you do this, I'd appreciate, well, I didn't say that. We spoke, we talked it through. I said, I think you need to step in and get this today. It's got to be someone who, we're not going to do this more than one more time. And she says, yes, I can get this. I've done this done many times. After the fact, I then spoke to her, not in the setting of that, because I didn't really want Ella to see it as either, because I didn't want to come from it. I have gotten confrontational before. So this time I was like, let me try this a better way. And so I think I told her, I said, let's partner with this. Next time, let's collaborate. I would be okay with you trying on Ella if she's okay, but let's get consent before we do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
How did they respond?
She was actually very open to it. She's like, I'm sorry, we don't have this many cases coming through. So it was an opportunity for education and all this stuff. And I said, I understand all of that, but let's also, I would be more comfortable. I think we all would, if I was aware of that. So then I could better prepare Ella. I wouldn't have told her that was, or I would have said no. I've had too many scenarios where people that aren't the right people come in to try to provide care. And that.
So it's bringing up so many more questions. So was it at a teaching hospital? So,
No. Well, I think there's people, so teaching hospitals, you're going to come up with that.
Yeah.
Have consent. You can always say, today is not the day that I want students working on my patient, on my child.
Does a resident count as a student?
Oh, that's a good question. I would be, well,
The reason I'm asking the question is
they have a license, but are they the most qualified to come in and do that procedure on your child? That's where I think we're going gray.
As we're talking, I'm like becoming more and more aware of so many traumatic events. I was like, okay, I think I need to unpack a little bit more of these than I've realized. No, because there was a situation where it was post-brain surgery for Levi. He was not recovering well. He had a cerebral spinal fluid leak. The protocol for that was that we do a lumbar puncture to basically give a path of least resistance to have the CSF drain versus overflow out of his brain. Doesn't it sound fun?
It's horrible.
So the recipe is lumbar puncture and all that. And so I don't know if this was the first or second lumbar puncture, but it was the resident coming in to do it. And this particular resident, just to not exude, and these are, brain surgery residents.
Oh gosh.
I just didn't have the vibe that like he was the guy that I wanted to like be poking this particular needle in my son's back. So I did step in and I said, I think I addressed it with the nurse and I said, this was later in the day. Of course, he was supposed to have this procedure earlier in the day, now late in the day. And I think like evening. And I essentially said, I don't want the resident doing it. I want the attending. And the nurse did a great job. The resident came in and said, I heard you don't want me doing it. Something like that. He didn't say it exactly like that, but a variation. And he was respectful. But it was also the situation, well, either I can do it today or the surgeon can come do it tomorrow too. And so then I'm in a situation where like, okay. Yeah, this was supposed to happen. And right. And so I ended up letting him do it. I won't go into the whole story. It's not a good situation. It's all fine now. But it's still to this day is the moment that Levi identifies as like the most painful thing he's ever done. So what do we do with me? There's so many things. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
hard to unpack that.
So that's a side note. That's just for your all entertainment and my recognition that there's some work to do over here. Okay. But not using that scenario exactly, but you mentioned earlier the idea of a vague apology versus a real apology and why it matters for rebuilding trust. So you just, kind of showed an example of like an interchange you had with somebody, and that seems like that really rebuilt trust. But I guess more generally, what thoughts would you put in the minds of the caregivers and moms listening about what's a vague apology, what's a real apology, and how do we navigate that on our end?
Well, I think a vague apology is if someone's it lands kind of like as minimizing. So if they're like, oh, I'm sorry, or like that resident that came in and said, I heard you didn't want me to work on your patient. That's minimizing your request. That's saying you don't know what is in the best interest of your child. And I think that really hits. Mm-hmm. That really feels loaded. Now, if you were to get more like a healing or maybe a more real apology, one that's actually going to start, providing trust again. And it takes time. I don't think in a situation like yours, you have, like you said, work to do now to get that trust back. Mm-hmm. But it would be something like, and I'm going to use that resident as an example. It would be that resident coming into you and saying, I understand that, I'm trying to just think off the top of my head, but it would be some way to validate your feelings.
I understand you have a concern about me doing this procedure. Mm-hmm.
I understand concern. It would be validating. And it would be recognizing that it's okay for you to say that you're not comfortable with him providing that care. And I think that's one of our struggles. He is learning. He's at a different level. Doesn't mean he's not great. And I know they're desperate. They want to have those experiences, and that's why they're at a teaching hospital. But here's the thing. We don't land in a teaching hospital because we choose to.
It's a good point. It's the one we got.
The one we got. I mean, some people might. I'm not going to say not everyone. But in general, I don't really think we have a choice. That to me right there, again, opens a little space so that we can say, today's not the day. I understand you need experience, but my child's not up to it today. My child's not feeling, they don't need to know your backstory either, but just in that situation, I would say that's probably a learning experience for the resident as well. I had a similar one where Ellen was going to go under a surgery and the anesthesiologist, a young person came, I should say, they're probably not that young. They were obviously a learning mode. And this guy comes in and he was on a skateboard, kept referring to our daughter as a he, and we kept repeating, our daughter is not named this, it's a she. It was like he was presently just not there that day. And I know they have a lot of stuff on their plate. But would you want your child going under with that?
I'm still stuck on a skateboard.
But that's what the
Skating inside.
I still have a picture of wild hair, skateboard. He just came in. It was like on his backpack and he's running in to see us. And the level of professionalism there was loud. And that's what, again, that fades our ability to trust the person coming in to provide care for our children. So going back to what does a real apology look like? And I think it is taking ownership.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been looking at is that I know that medical schools are working on this because reconciliation in education and a lot of the healthcare schools haven't done well of admitting mistakes. And we understand the reason. They don't want a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Fearful. There's this huge dread. There actually is a law, though, that from my understanding called the apology law that does protect a lot of these professionals. So if they were to come and apologize for a mistake, they're not just out there completely. And so I think that schools are working towards educating professionals to come and do the apologies, to admit mistakes, because the reality is mistakes will happen.
I think that's a really important side to look at, is on the behalf of the provider to recognize that they're in the situation where it's like their career on the line or doing what they think is right. Exactly. And I think it's a lot of tension. And I think for us to have compassion on that side of it, I think will just open a space for us to have that human to human conversation.
Yeah,
I think that's what these are. They're human to human conversations. They're acknowledging both sides, that one, you're the professional and you probably do know more than me in this area, but I also am the caregiver, the mom, the advocate, and I have the same role here with a different level of expertise. And but coming as humans together, I feel like that kind of seems to take any complications away and just kind of ground it a little bit in simple conversations.
Yeah. And I think the way you were asking, well, how would you do this? What would you do if you're walking in, with the scenario with that resonance? Maybe what you could say, I think it comes down to language and clarity. And one of the things that I've leaned in on is the word collaboration. If I can walk in the room and say, hey, how are we going to collaborate on this today? So it might be example would be a new nurse coming in to do an infusion. How can I collaborate? How can I support you today with my child? I think that is opening up a different type of communication. Some people will push back. It's like, oh, what is this mom doing?
Yeah. Oh, you're in my space. This is my room. But I love the way that question kind of gives the foundation for who you are going to be in the room. As in, you're not a passive witness to what's happening. You're an active participant of this person's care team. Obviously, in your case, your daughter's. And I think that sets the tone for really valuable conversation with the provider. And like you said, some people are going to be all in game. Some people are going to be like, oh, you're taking me out of my normal routine where I kind of operate more mechanically, or where it's easier to operate more mechanically, right? To forget that we actually are working with all these humans that are not, again, projects. Okay, so I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface, and there's so much we could talk about, but we've been talking. And so we're going to wrap it up. Funny backstory, guys, is I was like, oh, I think I want to make 2 different parts of this episode. I was exactly wrong on how much we can accomplish in one conversation, but that's wonderful. We're going to bring Anika back for a second part of the conversation, because I bet you guys are like, what, but I want to know more about her as a mom and as a human. And don't worry, that is to come. And so we will bring her back very soon. Okay, so any last kind of closeout words that you have, or anything just on the topics that we've touched on today that feel like, you want to mention before we call this complete?
Okay, I think grace is one of the things that we have to provide ourselves and even to others. I mean, here I've talked like I know what I'm talking about, but when I get into a room or in a situation, it's very different. It's so organic. There's so much complexity to what we deal with that I think you just have to give yourself grace and understanding that we're not going to do it perfect.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do the best we can, but by providing a different lens, and that's what I hope I did today, maybe it opens up a different space to examine, situations that might arise.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe more clarity or better forms of communication can come from it. That's what I'm trying to work on myself as a person in all those areas of my life, but specifically in the healthcare setting. Because, I think it's okay for us to ask and seek clarity and want better communication from the people that are providing care for our kids.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you for the closing words. And I think, grace to ourselves and grace to others. I think that's a totally different tone than I think we can start from as, we are living in the impact of so many of these really hard experiences. So, Anika, thank you so much for bringing your expertise and your history and your story today.
What fun. Thank you so much, Kira. I had a wonderful time as I knew I would.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you very soon on the next episode.
Okay. Great.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.